वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम् असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतङ्गमय। Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let us offer our salutation to Lord Krishna, the embodiment of bliss, who came to establish dharma and punish the wicked. Let us pray to him to lead us from unreal to real, to lead us from darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge, to lead us from death to immortality. We have been studying the Yoga of Meditation, chapter 6, verse number 35. Last time also we discussed the same verse. I am continuing, explaining the verse further. Sri Krishna admits what Arjuna said about controlling the mind, because it is restless, continuously running. So Sri Krishna admits that point and tells it's no doubt true, but it is not impossible. Unless the mind is controlled, you cannot achieve really anything worthwhile. So he tells the means of controlling the mind. You have to follow certain ways to control the mind. Simply by thinking I should control is not enough. You should be active enough to take steps to see that mind is really controlled. So Shri Krishna gives here two ways of controlling the mind. One is abhyasa and second is vairagya. That is, one is steady practice without any break. Today I got a great tea party, so I could not do practice. Tomorrow I have to attend wedding party, so I cannot. Day after tomorrow my dad is coming, I got to go to airport, so I cannot practice. Millions of reasons, millions. That means practice is broken. With broken practice, really it is difficult to control the mind. On the other hand, the uncontrolled mind becomes more strong and more stubborn. So here Shri Krishna very clearly tells that one should practice without break. What needs to be done must be done at all costs. That zeal should be there. Zeal. That's the most important quality required. And coupled with practice, one should have dispassion. Vairagya, I don't know the correct translation of the Sanskrit in English, but they say it is dispassion. That means mind is not inclined at all towards the distractions and temptations that the world offer. So it is total disinterestedness in the playing of pleasures in the world. So Lord Krishna says practice coupled with dispassion one should be able to control the mind. So actually vairagya and dispassion are compared to reins of the horse. See, the being is riding the horse. Viveka and vairagya are the reins of the horse. To control horse is the mind. That conception has been nicely described in Kathopanishad, which you please read. So, Drishtadashravika Vishaya Vitrishtasya Vashikara Samgya Vairagyam. The essential companion is Vairagya, learning to let go of the many attachments, aversions, fears and false identities that are clouding the true self. Mercilessly you must give up all those things. They show up in different ways. So, Viveka and Vairagya, they work together. It's not in isolation. Practice leads you in the right direction, while Vairagya allows you to continue the inner journey without getting sidetracked into the pains and pleasures along the way. Normally, the mind gets attached by seeing or hearing something. It's not unnatural. It is mainly through the eyes and ears that the mind goes out and gathers things to satisfy its desires. Before the mind is attracted to something it sees or hears, you should have discrimination to see whether that object is good for you or not. Don't behave in an indiscriminate way. The mind should not just go and grasp as it wants. So vairagya or dispassion literally means colorless. V in Sanskrit also means without. Raga means also color. It also means attachment and it's also called color. So viraga means without color. Every desire brings its own color to the mind. The moment you color the mind, a ripple is formed. Just as when a stone is thrown into a calm lake, it creates waves in the water. When the mind is tossed by these desires, one after the other, there won't be peace or rest in the mind. And with a restless mind, you can't have steady practice. When you want to do something constantly, your mind should not be distracted by other desires. That's why this sort of dispassion must always go with the practice. Any practice without this dispassion can never be fulfilled. That's why many times people say, oh, I have been practicing meditation for so many years. I pray daily, morning and evening. Yes, they do that. We have to accept it because we see them sitting in meditation every day or going to the church or temple. Sometimes they sit in front of the altar for hours. There are people who read the whole Bible every day. There are people who repeat the Bhagavad Gita every day. They won't even eat until they do that. The moment they get up, they go in front of the altar and repeat entire Gita before even drinking a glass of water. But still they remain in the same state. The reason is that their minds are still dissipated because of the different varieties of desires. How many people stand in front of the altar and think of their business or allow their eyes to wander about to see how many of their friends are there? temples and churches have become social centers. They have lost their original purpose because the minds of the people are more attracted to worldly things than really to prayer. The lips may repeat the prayer mechanically like a phonograph record, but the mind wanders to other places. That's why you can't collect and compose the mind unless it is free from distracting desires. Meditation is possible only when the mind is free from attachment, distractions, from temptations. Immediately somebody will ask, if you are unattached, won't you lose all incentive and become dull? The answer is no. When we say unattached, it means without personal desires. If you want really to be greedy in serving others. Try to remove the suffering of other people. Once you are unattached in your personal life, you can serve others. And by doing that, you will find more and more joy. Even with God, don't have personal desire. Many people approach God and say, oh God, give me this, give me that. Help me win this campaign and so on. Or if you help me pass this examination, I will light 10 candles. Like that. We try to business with God. We try to do business with God. It's called shopkeeping. It only shows our own ignorance. Those very candles were given to us by Him. So what is the idea of giving them back to Him as if we have created something? Our desirous mind deludes us and we become ignorant. The discrimination of a desirous person gets completely faded. His or her interest is to achieve things, that's all. So the desirous person doesn't bother to wait and think. The Vedanta scriptures say, even the desire for liberation is a bondage. Even if you desire liberation, you are binding yourself. Your desire binds you and brings restlessness. To get the liberation, you have to be completely desireless. Is it possible to be desireless? No. Actually, it is not possible. As long as the mind is there, its duty is to desire. It seems to be contradictory, but the secret is that any desire without any personal selfish motive will never bind you. Why? Because the pure selfless desire has no expectation whatsoever, so it knows no disappointment, no matter what the result. But though it expects nothing, it has its own reward. When you make someone happy, you see his happy face and feel happy yourself. If you have really experienced the joy of just giving something for the sake of giving, you will wait greedily for opportunities to get that joy again and again. Many people think that by renouncing everything, by becoming selfless and desireless, there is no enjoyment. No, that's not so. Instead, you become the happiest person. The more you serve, the more happiness you enjoy. Such a person knows the secret of life. There's a joy in losing everything, in giving everything. You can't be eternally happy by possessing things. The more you possess, the more sad you become. Haven't we seen millionaires, people of high position? Are they happy? No. The higher the position, the greater the trouble. Only a saint, a renunciate, is always happy because there is nothing for a saint to lose. Because you don't have anything, you have yourself always. That's the secret. That's why we say, have vairagya, have dispassion, viveka, vairagya, have non-attachment. By renouncing worldly things, you possess the most important sacred property. What is that? Peace. Next comes verse number 36. Lord Krishna says, Asamyatatmana yogo dushprapa iti me matihi Vishyatmana tu yatata shakyo vaptu upayataha. All these verses of the Bhagavad Gita are considered mantras. Each verse is like a mantra. That is, it is very sacred, very valuable, immeasurable pleasure, immeasurable treasure, all these verses do possess. In this verse number 36, Lord Krishna says, yoga is hard to be attained by one who is not self-controlled, but by the self-controlled it is attainable by striving through proper means. Such is my conviction. Proper means. Not doing it in a haphazard way. No. You must be very methodical in doing practices. Then only it is possible to control the uncontrolled mind. So, practice has been given paramount importance. How many days in a month we miss prayers, we miss doing meditation, we miss calling God? What is the use of simply giving excuses? They won't give any benefit. On the other hand, they have negative effect on the mind. The more excuse you give, you become more susceptible to give more excuses. That means, giving excuse means defending your weakness. Defending your weakness. By defending the weakness, can you overcome the weakness? Totally impossible. So stop defending your weaknesses. Stop giving excuses. It's not allowed. If you are very strict and disciplined in practices, don't allow any excuse or reason for not doing the practices. Verse number 37, Arjuna said, Ayati shraddhayopeto yoga chanita mansaha aprapya yoga samsiddhim kangadim Krishna gacchati. Oh Krishna, I have got a question. For the faithful, but of unsubdued mind, who deviates from the path of meditation and fails to attain yogic perfection, what's the destination of such a person? He cannot achieve the goal in this lifetime. It's too hard to achieve the final goal. For whatever reason, he leaves the body, he dies. Then what is the fate of such a person? What all he has done, is it a waste? Or there is no hope for him? All these are implied in this question. Verse number 38. Kachinno bhayaviprashtaschinna brahmivanashyati apratishto mahabaho vimudo brahmanapati. O Krishna, such a person does not perish like a dispersing cloud, having lost both yoga and bhoga, the heavenly and worldly pleasures, supportless and bewildered on the path of self-realization, because the idea of realization of the truth, he renounced everything. But he is not able to achieve that goal. And because of practicing spirituality, he gave up all pleasures of the world. That means he completely lost both yoga and bhoga. That is, he neither get the benefit of meditation nor get the benefit of pleasures. This is the continuation of Arjuna's question. The dispersed cloud does not descend on earth as rainfall. It loses its distinctiveness in the sky. Even such is the fate of the one fallen in yoga. He has neither the here nor the hereafter. Having renounced the sense pleasures which are all of the earth, he happens to be one who has lost the here. And in not having obtained the supreme bliss, born of the perfection in yoga, he is bereft of the hereafter, the path of Brahman. That's how he becomes fallen from both. He continues in the verse number 39. Etan me samshyam Krishna chetum arhasya sheshataha tadanya samshayasyasya chetan himapadyate. O Krishna, only you are able to completely dispel this doubt of mine. Because there is none other than you who can dispel this doubt. Here we should observe what tremendous faith, shraddha, dedication, devotion Arjuna had towards Lord Krishna. He had full and unshaken faith in Sri Krishna, that he could only dispel his doubt. Secondly, Arjuna had completely surrendered himself at the feet of the Guru. He considered Krishna as his own Guru, the spiritual master. In the verse number 7 of the second chapter, Arjuna proclaims, Shishyasteham shadimam tvam prapanna. So, he surrenders and he declares that he is totally surrendered to Sri Krishna and he is most happy to be his disciple. So here comes the Guru-Shishya relationship between Sri Krishna and Arjuna. Sri Krishna, the greatest spiritual teacher, Arjuna, the greatest student. Both are great. The result is the message of the Bhagavad Gita, which is greater than the greatest. So the disciple Arjuna firmly believed that Guru Sri Krishna is the Lord of the three worlds, Trilokanatha. And he is Ishvara. He knows the past, present and future events of the entire universe. Arjuna was very confident that Lord Krishna was certainly aware of the future fate of those who could not attain their goal of realization in course of their lives. So Arjuna was praying to Sri Krishna to dispel all his doubts about the matter. What will happen to a person who could not achieve the goal in his lifetime? Is that lifetime wasted because he could not achieve the goal? Lord Krishna says, no, it is not wasted. So now Sri Krishna answers and dispels all the doubts of Arjuna threadbare. He tells, Partha Naiveha Namutra Vinashastasya Vidyate Nahi Kalyanakrit Kaschid Durkatintata Gacchati. Arjuna, there is no destruction for such a yogi either in this world or in the next world. None verily who does good ever comes to grief. Good certainly bears good results, good reward. Have no doubt about it. Even the smallest good a person has done gives him tremendous reward in different ways to rescue him from dangers. So Gita assures that whoever has done good deeds is never to be afraid of. That means one should not despair. The gracious Lord is a master of love and compassion. He knows our weaknesses. He too knows our human imperfect efforts to overcome them. But then Shri Krishna says, no sincere effort will ever go in vain. Gita is a scripture of hope and teaches the truth that a yoga prashta gradually through sadhanas, through study of scriptures, through the association of holy persons and by the grace of the Guru ascends and step by step raises to purify his heart. Whatever the obstacles, whatever the failures, whatever the lapses, one thing you must always remember: never lose sight of God realization as the goal of your life. It may be that in spite of your satsang, in spite of your fellowship with great souls, in spite of your japa and dhyana, you succumb to sinful acts. But don't be depressed. For the holy influence of fellowship with Satpurushas and of your daily satsang, your japa and jhana, will gradually enable you to get rid of sins. You will become virtuous. From virtue, you will gradually rise in the scale of evolution. Until you learn Sharanam, that is, act of surrendering, Krishnarpanam, offering everything to Lord Krishna, dedication to the life divine. Until you learn them, step by step, you will ascend. Until you learn Sharanam and self-surrender, you can't rise in spiritual level. But by constant practice and holding on to the concept without any shaking, surely step by step you will ascend, you will not fall into dreaded life. प्राप्य पुण्यकृतां लोकान् उषित्वा शाश्वती समाः शुचीनां श्रीमतांगे योग पृष्ठो विजायते. Whoever embarks on the yogic path and leaves his body before reaching his highest goal attains heavenly status of the virtuous. He stays there a very long time and then takes birth again in this world in a home of the pure and prosperous in order to continue his quest. So, here Lord Krishna clearly states that whoever has done sadhanas and acquired merit, but before he could realize the goal, he had left his body, but such a person does continue his life in heavenly regions and stays there for some time, and then again is born on this earth to continue his spiritual journey. So that's how it is. So you don't have to despair. Athava yoginameva kule bhavati dhimatam etadhi durlabhataram loke janma yadidrisham. Or he is born in a family of yogis, endowed with wisdom. Verily a birth like this is very difficult to obtain in this world. So a man who has practiced certain amount of spiritual exercises in his previous life, he is given again a chance and is being born in a family conducive for his continued spiritual practices. That is, he is born in a family of very well established men of spirituality. It enhances the spiritual evolution of the aspirant. But that conducive spiritual environment is manifested in the family where the yogi takes birth. In fact, we have seen Sri Ramakrishna's life. Where was he born? In a village, born to poor Brahmin parents, but they were highly spiritual, spotless, completely pure at heart, highly devoted and dedicated. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna's mother, Chandramani, could every day see gods and goddesses, like we see the people. It was quite natural for her to see them. Once she saw Goddess Lakshmi decorated with full of ornaments on her body, walking through. And Chandramani was a little worried because she is going with so much ornaments on the body, people may do some harm. So she cries, "Oh Devi, you are going with so much ornaments. You have to be careful, people may do any harm." But Mother simply smiles. She was none other than Goddess Lakshmi. So all these visions she could get because of her purity of heart. And Father Ramchandra, he is also very devoted. He had the vision of Vishnu, who told him that he would be born as his son. So Sri Ramakrishna was born in that blessed family. Anyway, God gives chance to us that way to continue our spiritual practices with great zeal and not stop not till the goal is reached. Should stop here. Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Let us offer obsequies to Lord Krishna, the embodiment of bliss, who came to establish dharma and punish the wicked. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.